Hey everyone, welcome back to another Intellect nursing video. Today we're going to go over diabetes mellitus. We're going to go over type 1 versus type 2. So this is everything you're going to need to know about for your NCLEX and for your nursing exams. We're going to go over pathophysiology, signs and symptoms, risk factors, complications, and management. So let's get right into it. As always, make sure you guys open up your pathophysiology concept maps. There is a study guide already ready for this lecture, so follow along and write your notes. So first things first, we're always starting with pathophysiology because this is the core foundation of what you'll need to know for you to make the other things make sense, such as your signs and symptoms, your risk factors and complications. So let's get right into the pathophysiology. The first thing to cover when we're talking about pathophysiology is the definition of diabetes mellitus. So type 1 versus type 2, they are both chronic diseases of the endocrine system that is related to either a complete absence of insulin, which is your type 1, or a deficiency of insulin, which is your type 2. The way I like to think of it is usually when we have patients who are type 1 diabetic, those signs and symptoms come first because it's usually onset of a juvenile age. So it's usually your pediatric type patients that find out that they have type 1 diabetes. So type 1 comes before type 2. So type 1 is your complete absence of insulin, and it's usually your pediatric patients that have the onset of symptoms. And this is usually autoimmune related. So sometimes there's not really an explainable cause. It's usually just an autoimmune response, which causes the beta cells within that pancreas to get destroyed and not have the ability to release or even produce insulin in the first place. Versus your type 2 patients are usually the adult age patients that have a lot of other modifiable risk factors involved, which we'll go over, but sometimes it's also highly increased with genetics. But let's get into the pathophysiology and compare the two here. So type 1, let's start there. Type 1 diabetics. These patients have a complete absence of insulin. So you can imagine a case where there's an autoimmune response and it completely destroys the beta cells, which are responsible for the release of insulin. Without them, there is no insulin at all. Now, with type 2 diabetics, there's a bigger story to it. So I'm going to give you an example just for it to make sense and drive it home for you. So let's imagine a case where a patient is obese, they're not eating the right foods, it's a very high carbohydrate diet, and eventually the insulin that is coming from the pancreas, the beta cells, they can't keep up. They're producing so much insulin to drive that carbohydrate, that glucose, into the cell to turn it into glycogen. But after a while, it starts getting exhausted. So with that, at the same time, because of that high increase of insulin that's constantly in the blood in response to the high glucose in the blood, well, those cells that communicate to insulin get desensitized. They're kind of like, oh yeah, there's a lot of insulin there, so I really don't need to be very sensitive. So what you have with type 2 diabetics, you eventually get an exhausted pancreas that is not really able to have those beta cells keep up with the glucose in the body. So you have a decreased amount of insulin. At the same time, you have a decreased sensitivity to insulin. So once you have a deficient release of insulin, well, at the same time, that insulin is not as productive or effective once it does get released into the bloodstream, because for so long, the cells that were communicating to that insulin are desensitized. They're like, not a big deal. So now you have glucose just sitting there because, for one, you have decreased insulin being released into the blood. And for two, when there is insulin that gets released, it's not as effective as it should be. So what you're going to hear on your nursing exams and your NCLEX is a progressive loss of beta cell function, so decreased insulin release, and also an increased peripheral resistance to insulin. So really it's two things, and it's a double whammy if you really think about it, because for one, you have decreased insulin secretion, and for two, you have increased resistance to that insulin. So what happens in result? Hyperglycemia. So as you can see, there's a lot more steps to type 2 diabetes. There's more of a process and a chronic part of it. Versus your type 1 patients, it's much simpler of a case where there just is no insulin being produced at all. So they're relying on exogenous insulin. So remember that when we start going over your signs and symptoms, and especially your management, because you'll see a different place of management steps with your type 1 versus your type 2. So let's get into the risk factors first before we go into signs and symptoms and complications of this disease. So your risk factors. Something you're really going to need to know for your NCLEX and your nursing exams is knowing your modifiable risk factors versus your non-modifiable risk factors. So modifiable meaning you can change it yourself. It's usually a lifestyle that is causing this disease. So modifiable, what can a patient change to decrease the likelihood or decrease the signs and symptoms associated with diabetes mellitus, especially your type 2? So that is obesity. So of course, being obese puts you at major risk. With that comes a high carbohydrate diet, sedentary lifestyle, which you could argue is very associated with obesity, and hypertension. So make sure you write those 4 things down. That will be on your NCLEX and it will be on your nursing exams. Versus your non-modifiable. So what can you not change about yourself that puts you at risk for diabetes? That would be your genetics and your age. Of course, the older you are, the more likely you're going to have diabetes just because the general age changes. But make sure you understand what is modifiable versus non-modifiable. And an extra little risk factor here is cow's milk at infancy. That may be another thing they question you on, especially during the pediatric sections. Now moving on to signs and symptoms. Now, the hallmark signs and symptoms you're really going to need to know for that NCLEX and the nursing exams is the 3 Ps. That includes your polyphagia, which is increased hunger, polyuria, which is increased urination, and then polydipsia, which is increased thirst. Now, I'm going to explain this and relate it to the pathophysiology first before we move on to the rest of the signs and symptoms, just because this is truly foundational in your understanding of the disease. So, polyphagia. So why would a patient with diabetes mellitus have polyphagia? So why would they be hungry all the time? Well, if you really think about it, when there is a decreased insulin production or decreased insulin release to drive that glucose home into the cell to turn it into glycogen, which is your energy stores, well, your body is constantly saying, hey, I don't have the nutrients that I need to fully function. So I'm going to go ahead and tell the rest of my systems that I need to eat more. So it's our body's way of communicating with each other that, hey, we're not getting the nutrients that we need. So of course, I'm going to increase the hunger and of course, drive myself to want to eat more. So that's the simple way of putting it. Now, of course, we could use all the fancy words, but really that's all you really need to know and understand. So that is really truly why we have something called polyphagia. Now, going into polyuria. So that is increased urination. That is our body's compensation mechanism to get rid of the high glucose in the blood. So when there's a high amount of glucose, it acts like a diuretic. Your kidneys sense that and they're going to say, hey, let's go ahead and excrete some more glucose out of our urine because we need some way to get rid of this high glucose, the hyperglycemia there. So that is just another compensation mechanism that our body has when there's a high amount of glucose in the blood. And then you have polydipsia. Now in response, of course, if you're going to urinate a lot and you're going to lose electrolytes and fluids, that's going to make you thirsty. So just of course, if you put all those 3 together, it truly makes sense when you know the pathophysiology of this disease. Now, moving on to the rest of the signs and symptoms. Of course, not shocking, but they're going to have hyperglycemia. So of course, when you take their blood sugar or if you do their labs, their glucose is typically going to be on the higher side. So now getting into the less obvious signs and symptoms. So what happens to our body when there is a high amount of blood sugar for an extended period of time? So think vascular and think what sugar does. Sugar, when it gets mixed with water, for example, makes that water thick. So that's essentially what you can think about when it's sitting in our blood. It makes our blood thick. So you could hear the word viscosity. It increases the viscosity of the blood. So what happens when the blood is very thick? Well, for one, you can have vascular issues. So you're at risk for clotting. So you're at risk for, we're going to get into complications here in a minute, but you're at risk for DVTs and pulmonary embolisms. But really what happens to our vein health? So you're going to hear macrovascular versus microvascular complications here in a minute. But just know, in result of that, signs and symptoms, you're going to have peripheral neuropathy. That is why you have some of these diabetic patients, especially over time with the type 2 diabetes, they'll have decreased sensation in their feet or in their fingers because they have peripheral neuropathy. There is nerve damage to their actual nervous system, and that's because of the lack of blood flow to it for an extended period of time. So they may have, they're at risk for increased wounds and things like that, and they may not even realize it because they have peripheral neuropathy, they have a decreased sensation to their limbs. And in result of another complication is vision changes. So that is a microvascular complication. and a sign and symptom of diabetes is you have decreased vision, so blurry vision, especially over time. And then if you have an increased episode of that, your vision may even get blurrier acutely. And that is because there is a decreased blood flow to the retina, causing blurry vision over time. And then of course, a sign and symptom that makes it a little bit more obvious, they may have metabolic syndrome where they have central obesity. So a lot of that fat is sitting in their trunk, so their abdomen or in their lower back. So that is a common sign and symptom as well of diabetes mellitus. But to summarize the signs and symptoms, really understand the 3 Ps and know why as well. Getting into complications. So the complications play very closely with, of course, the signs and symptoms and the pathophysiology. One you're really going to need to know, and they're going to question you on this every time for the nursing exam and the NCLEX, is hypoglycemia. Why? Well, of course, we're probably going to manage their blood sugar and give them things that decrease the blood sugar. Well, that puts them at risk for low blood sugar or hypoglycemia. But there's also a pathophysiology result of this. So think about, once again, especially with your type 2 diabetes patients. Now, a type 1 is much more simple. If you give them too much insulin, because they're going to rely on the exogenous insulin because they have no insulin production at all. So when you give them too much insulin, it's going to decrease the blood sugar. Now, with your type 2 diabetes patients, it gets a little trickier to understand the pathophysiology and understand behind why they're at risk for hypoglycemia. Now, truly with this disease, there's not a perfect balance, of course. So one patient may have a decreased insulin production, the decreased function of the beta cells, where another patient may have more of a problem with insulin resistance. So with these type 2 diabetic patients, you can assume they have a decreased ability to sustain a normal blood sugar in the first place. Now, of course, hyperglycemia is more likely, but hypoglycemia, it could also happen with the instability in general. So let's say a patient doesn't eat for a very long time. They may not have that ability, especially with the pancreas having low function of the beta cells, releasing that insulin. Well, sometimes that communication is really off because of that increased resistance to the insulin itself in the cells. So that communication may also be off. So that puts them at risk for a hypoglycemic event as well, especially when it's related to decreased intake or, of course, their diabetic medications. Now, major complications you need to be aware of. There is a completely separate video that I made explaining the two. So it's basically kind of like this video where I explain DKA, so diabetic ketoacidosis, which is more likely related to type 1 diabetes, versus your hyperglycemic hyperosmolar syndrome, which is your HHS. There's a completely separate video explaining those two and comparing them, but just know that your HHS is more likely your type 2 diabetic patients versus your DKA is more likely your type 1 diabetic patients. And of course, another complication is foot ulcers, and that's related to your peripheral neuropathy. They cannot feel it, so let's say they're wearing a tight shoe, it's decreasing the circulation to that lower foot, let's say it's the heel, and they may not know. And an extended period of time goes on, and of course, a venous ulcer presents itself. So that is a common issue with diabetic patients as well. And of course, as you can assume, hypertension, since all the vascular issues that occur, macrovascular and microvascular, clogging with hyperglycemia and the hyperlipidemia that's likely occurring as well. So cardiac disease is not uncommon with these types of patients. And then lastly, of course, we talked about with the signs and symptoms is retinopathy. That's a microvascular issue. So make sure you understand the difference. There may be a question comparing in your ability to understand which one's macro, which one's micro. Really is as simple as what's a big vein versus a small vein. Your big veins are maculovascular, so there are complications for clots. So clots being DVTs, pulmonary embolisms, strokes, versus your microvascular is a small circulation where it is the circulation to the retina, for example. So that is your microvascular complication, which is retinopathy, which causes decreased vision. Now moving on to the last section with the diagnostics and the management. Starting out with diagnostics, what do we want to see to confirm a diagnosis of diabetes mellitus? So the first thing is a fasting glucose. So anything over 126 is considered a diabetic patient if their fasting blood glucose is above 126. Now the hallmark diagnostic tool for this disease is the hemoglobin A1C. So anything above 6.5% is considered diabetes mellitus. Now the reason why hemoglobin A1C is considered that hallmark diagnostic test is because it doesn't really rely on within the last 24 hours or a meal that you ate. It's actually showing history of the past 3 months. So it's kind of giving you an average score of what your blood glucose has been over the past 3 months. And then of course, anytime you do a random blood glucose, whether it was fasting or not, if it's above 200, that's also a sign of diabetes mellitus, but it's less specific than what your hemoglobin A1C would be or your fasting blood glucose. Now let's go over the management. So the management for type 1 versus type 2 is pretty similar, but for one, you need to know with the insulin, for example, type 1 insulin is mandatory. It's because these patients have no ability to secrete insulin and they have to rely on exogenous or external insulin, so insulin that is not made by their body. So we have to replace that. And that is through, of course, insulin that you see given through an insulin or subcutaneous injection. Or of course, a lot of the times nowadays, these patients have those insulin pumps that are automatic and can track your blood sugar continuously. So those are really nice and modern tools for patients. But in the hospital, usually those get taken off, especially because the hospital wants to control and know exactly and follow its policies, of course. Versus your type 2 diabetic patients. So anti-diabetic medications are usually your first line, so your metformins or your glipizide, for example. But after a while, if those continue to not work or if the patient's getting worse, then they may scale it into insulin management. Now, if you guys want to watch a video about the insulin types and how we use them for these diabetic patients, definitely check out that video. Now, as for lifestyle, we're going to do a lot of education with these patients, as that is a huge management role for the nurse especially, is teaching them about how to change those modifiable risk factors that we talked about. So increasing your activity, losing weight, especially if those are the reasons why they have diabetes. And with that, you're going to encourage a consistent carbohydrate diet. Now watch out for those keywords that they may try to trick you on in the exam, such as low carbohydrate diet, because it's not necessarily a low carbohydrate diet, because if you did that, it puts them at risk for hypoglycemia. So you want to keep a consistent carbohydrate diet, which means basically we don't want to give so many carbs where it's just going to make their blood sugar worse, but we don't want to give them too little where it could make it very low. So we want to keep it consistent, but also, of course, if the goal is to lower their weights, then of course we're going to put them in a slight caloric deficit, but we're going to do it in a very managed way. Now, typically as nurses in the hospital, for example, you're going to follow an ACHS timeline for checking blood sugars and giving insulin. So you're going to check it right before their first meal, their breakfast, and then you're going to check it before their lunch, and then you're going to check it before their dinner, and then you're going to check it at night before they go to bed. So that's the basic understanding of ACHS. Now, the other types of patients who may be on tube feeding, it may be every 4 hours, it may be every 6 hours. Now, especially with your patients who may be on insulin drips, for example, those blood sugars are taken every 1 hour. So using the blood glucometer, of course, is going to be a pretty common task for the nurse and to monitor for that. And really the rest of the management as the nurse, you're going to just really look out for complications. Look out for clotting, look out for arrhythmias because they're at risk for cardiac disease, and especially look out for hypoglycemia. So to really quickly go over the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia, you're going to look out for irritation, change of behavior. They're going to look really nervous. They're going to look pale or sweaty, alter mental status. So all of those things, make sure you're checking their blood sugar. If there is any sort of those signs, make sure the first action is to check the blood sugar to confirm. And then of course, follow the hypoglycemic protocols of the hospital. All right, guys, that sums up everything you're going to need to know about for diabetes mellitus, type 1 versus type 2. Once again, if you guys want further details on HHS versus DKA or insulin medications, then make sure you guys go check out those external videos there. I hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.